Welcome to Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. In this podcast, I chat to athletes, coaches, and industry professionals about their sporting journey and the lessons they've learnt along the way. Guests range from Olympians to the everyday lover of sport, but the message stays the same. There is so much more to sport than what meets the eye. Make sure you hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts or follow on Spotify so you don't miss the release of each new episode. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. I'd love to hear from you. Before introducing this week's guest, I'm jumping in to let you know about a special Instagram giveaway happening right now. Brooke Stratton, Olympic long jumper and guest in Season 1, has kindly donated part of her 2016 Rio Olympic uniform to one special follower. With Tokyo coming up and Brooke literally jumping onto her second Olympic team, what a special piece of memorabilia. Head over to our Instagram page at Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart to enter. Entries close on Sunday the 30th of May at 10 a.m. Melbourne time. Read through the Instagram post to check out all the terms and conditions. Good luck! Welcome to part 2 of my chat with Matt Charles, a world-class full contact fighter, respected business owner and family man. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, pause this episode now and go and listen to it. We will be here when you get back. In the second part, Matt lets us into the mentality behind his club environment and the lessons he's learnt along the way. We also hear about his 12-hour fight in 2014 to raise money for a member of his community who was battling with MS. We get an insight into what he felt leading up to the event and what was going through his mind in those last few hours. If you've listened to part 1, you'd know that there's a little bit of background noise in this episode. What you can hear is what it's like on a Saturday morning in the studio. It was so good to feel the community vibes, especially since the extended period of time Melbourne spent in COVID lockdowns last year. Let's get into part 2 with Matt.
So most people sort of brag about it, especially having that club environment that we've got the best club in the world and we're all bonded and everything else. I've got a club here where the people that you've seen coming in and out all day, we had Johnny and Rog. They've both got 2 sons here.
Yeah.
Their youngest son, Robbie, he started in our Kinder Ninjas class. He was maybe 4 years old when he started.
Yeah.
He's 17 now. And of course, John started when Robbie was maybe 9 or 10 years old. So he'd been watching his son for quite some time. And the same with Roger. His son started very, very young as well. He sat on the sidelines and watched for a little bit. Both dads decided to join. Yeah. They both did it at the same time. They've been side by side for their whole journey, and they both graded a black belt 2 years ago. Was it 3 years ago? Huge journey. Yeah. And for the 2 of them, they had to fight the 50-man kumite, which is 50 rounds bare knuckle.
Wow.
But then a year later, you've got to back it up and fight another 40 rounds. So they both went through that. Both their children are now national champions in karate, and they've just done extremely well. We've travelled the world together. Yeah. And we've got a club here where it's not just the black belts and the high level people who fit the inner circle. Mm-hmm. I suppose we've got white belts who have become part of our inner circle pretty much straight away, and it's got nothing to do with your prowess as a martial artist and everything to do with fitting the mould of the person who displays Budo in their lives. Yeah. So people who are prepared to live the good life, be giving, they tend to fit in here a whole lot faster. Yeah,
it's the mentality rather than the physical.
Exactly right. I'll have guys that have been here, they're brown belts, they've been here for 10 years, but they're still kind of on the outside fringe of things. Just because I know that they don't live the way that they should, they profess one thing but then go and do another. And I'm very, very cautious about how close those types of people get to my inner circle. Yeah. Because those that are in the inner circle, I protect them with my life. Yeah. And I can sort of see people who I'll use an example. You've got somebody who is friendly to their neighbours. They know the bloke down the shop. They know this person. They're nice to that person. Everyone still sort of sees that same face of them every day. Everything's nice and kind. And then as they get to people who are closer in their circle to people who are living in their home, they're not very nice to those people that are in their home. And that's kind of the family that I grew up in. My father didn't like his kids at all, but the guy down the shop thought he was a good bloke, and the guy at the pub thought he was tops, and everybody else he worked with was great. So he was giving 90% of his love and attention to
the outer,
to the outer,
yeah.
to the 90%. Whereas I give my 90% to the closest 10%.
Yeah.
I've still got enough for everybody else. I don't know the guy's name down the shop. I might give him away, but that's about it. But those that are in that 10% get 90%
yeah.
of everything that I'm about. Everybody else on the outside gets that 10%. It's still a lot.
Yeah.
It's still a lot. But those that are in that tighter circle, they get the absolute best of me.
Yeah. And was that like a lesson you've learned through karate and living the lifestyle? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So living martial arts, you realise that there are so many people out there who make all these professions to be this and be that, and I'm a fifth dan this and seventh dan that, you know, world champion this and blah, blah, blah. And there are so many of them, and martial arts is no exception. You've got this massive collection of people, but the ones that you can actually trust is a very, very small amount. It's a very, very finite amount.
Yeah.
And we've searched the world practically to find them. So the ones that we have found that we cherish the most, we make sure that we look after. And especially with my teacher, he's pretty much at the pinnacle of it all, but there's only a handful of people that he actually trusts and has conversations with. And everybody else, all they get is just a couple of words, this and that. But to be in that tight circle with somebody, it's an honour. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't call it privilege, but it's certainly an honour.
Yeah, yeah. That's very special. I like that idea of looking at it. I know I have like a bubble around me, and I only let certain people into that bubble. And I guess it's like a similar concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So is there a lesson that you've learnt along the way that you'd either share to your younger self or maybe even your daughters or your students? Is there one lesson that would stand out?
Definitely. Be kind to yourself. Never say negative things about yourself. Not in the past, not in the future, definitely not in the present. You've got to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
99% of the world out there is going to be cruel and negative. You cannot afford to allow yourself to be negative to yourself in any way. Never call yourself names. Never call yourself stupid. I've gone back in time many, many times where I sort of sat beside my younger self and put an arm around his shoulder and said, don't worry, everything's going to work out just fine. Yep. Trust me. So I think that's probably the most important lesson is just be kind to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. There's a quote out there, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like, whatever you believe to be true will be true.
It is.
Yeah.
Whether you believe you are, whether you believe you aren't, you're right.
Yes, that's the quote. You've got it. Yeah.
Yeah, whether you think you are, whether you think you aren't, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And you become what it is that you say and project. And words are an extremely powerful thing.
Yeah.
I don't think people put enough emphasis on the importance of it, especially parents. I think more parents need to talk to their children about self-talk and self-discussion, self-discovery. But I think most parents don't do it themselves anyway.
Yes.
So it's hard to teach a parent, I need you to teach your child this, but I need to teach it to you first.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the difficult part that I find here. I get parents who come to me and say, my child is always misbehaving and you should be injecting them with all of the discipline that they should have in their lives. And I think, right, okay, no worries at all. So what I'll do is I'll start with you first.
Yes, yeah.
So how about I need you to be a better person, I need you to
they're going to learn off you. Yeah. Yeah.
I just had this conversation with a student not too long ago, and I sat down and I said to the parent, you know, in my house I have a rule, and that is that we don't call names. Doesn't matter how silly it seems, we don't call names, especially to ourselves. And he said, oh, well, I suppose my daughter hears me say that I'm an idiot all the time and I'm this and I'm that, you know, but you know, I keep telling her to believe in herself. But how can you expect somebody to believe in themselves if the person who's trying to teach them that doesn't follow the same advice?
Yeah.
You've got to take those lessons on for yourself first.
And it's like that power of manifestation. It's a bit spiritual. I don't know if you're into that sort of side of things, but I know Mum did a lot of manifestation work with us. And yeah, she taught us affirmations and believe in that. And even now, like when I start to hear a negative thought into my mind, and I did it a lot through swimming, I'm like, you've got this, you've got this. When I was swimming 200 metres butterfly, I thought I was going to drown. Just having that positive self-talk does help. Yeah.
It's probably one of the most important aspects of self-growth. And I said this many, many times to the students, wherever we are, so especially out in the dojo, I'll tell them to look around. And I say that this was once just a figment of my imagination.
Yeah.
That's all this was. I was a kid with nothing, and I had dreams to become something.
Yeah.
And all of this was just a figment of my imagination. All of the skill that you know, especially when I give somebody a black belt, all the skill that you now know, everything that you've learned over these past 10 years, this journey that you've been on, this incredible journey, was just a figment of your imagination.
Yeah.
And now it's actually real.
Yeah.
You know, and I use that all the time. If I want something to happen, I verbalise everything. If I want something to happen, I'll always project it. I'll always say it. For years I said, I want to cut a hole in that wall. I'm going to cut a hole in that wall. I want to get in the next door. I'm going to cut that hole in the wall. Or I want to build upstairs. I want to build a bigger club. I want to do this. I want to do that. I'll verbalise everything. And then once I start to verbalise it, I'll start to believe it. I'll start to put plans in place. And then mentally it becomes a thought every day. And then, of course, setting goals, as you well know, what can I do today that's going to help me to achieve that goal? And every day I've got to be doing something positive that puts me one step closer to the manifestation of my reality.
Yeah.
And if my reality is, this is actually one of 5 clubs with 2,000 students, if I say that now, I can guarantee you that in a few years' time you'll come back, we will have 5 clubs and we'll have 2,000 students.
Yeah.
It's just, if you say it, you make it happen.
Yeah, and you got to act towards, live the life.
Exactly
that
right.
what you imagine. Yeah, so believe that you've already kind of, we're going a little bit spiritual, but I believe that you have got it and act towards the way that you've got it. Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't call it spiritual. I'd call it human.
Well, I think it's becoming a lot more mainstream now, which I really like.
It is, absolutely. We've got people from all walks of life here, many religions, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists. The common thread is that humanity, that we all have a goal, and the only way to achieve that goal is through positivity.
Yes.
You can never achieve anything through a negative frame of mind. It's just not going to work. Everything has to be from a positive standpoint. And if it's not, it falls over.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Now, we mentioned a little bit earlier your 12-hour fight for MS. So you did that in 2014.
Yes. Wow, 2014.
I know, that was like 7 years ago. And I remember coming into this studio for the first time then with my dad, and we watched you do a few rounds. Was there a reason why you did that?
There was. I had a friend of the club, Julie Ferroni. She had 4 boys that trained here.
Yeah. Back
then the boys were all really, really small. They're all big men now. Julie came in. She was one of those typical busy mums with 4 boys, kids running everywhere, controlling this, in the door here, out the door there. And I was just watching her go about her everyday life. And then I noticed one day she was limping, and I didn't really think a lot of it. And then a couple of weeks later, the limp was getting worse. And then she came in on a walking stick, and I said, "Are you okay? Have you hurt yourself?" And she said, "No, I've actually got MS." And I went, "Oh, right. How do you manage that?" She goes, "Well, I just do."
Yeah.
While she's wrestling all these kids back out to the car. From there, I just started to watch the way that she was dealing with that situation, and also dealing with her kids. They were boisterous.
Yeah, boisterous boys.
4 boys, really, really boisterous. Dad's really, really good as well. He's a professional golfer. So he's off doing what it is that he's doing, and Mum is running all these kids around and struggling with multiple sclerosis at the same time. And it was getting worse and worse and worse. Then one day she came to me and she said, "Look, I need to get treatment over in Russia. There's this new stem cell thing." She told me all about it, and then she said, "But it's going to cost me $70,000. And I went, "Wow, that's a lot."
Yeah.
And she said, "So I'm actually here to ask you a favour." And I'm thinking, I hope she's not asking me for 70 grand. You know?
Don't have 70 grand.
I don't have 70,000. She said, would you be willing to help me do a fundraiser? And straight away I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And she said, okay, well, and I said, have you got any ideas? And she didn't have any ideas. I thought, okay, well, I'll have a think about it. So I went home and then I sat there and literally I thought, how could I get the most amount of impact and do something that is just shows just as much of a fight that she's putting in.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm going to fight for 12 hours.
Yeah. And
I'll fight anyone who stands in front of me. In martial arts, there's a challenge called the 100-man kumite, which basically you fight 100 rounds back to back, and it's kind of the ultimate. That's the pinnacle.
Yeah. So
if you've got the physical strength and the emotional durability to be able to get through something like that, then that's a real sign that you're ready to become a master. So I thought a 12-hour fight. Now, mentally, I thought, well, I could definitely do it. Physically, I think I could get through it.
Yeah. Would be the mental.
Yeah. So then I pitched the idea to her. She said, I think that's a fantastic idea. So you'll fight for an hour, and then we'll get somebody else up, and then we'll get. I said, no, I'm going to fight the whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah.
And she was like, you're
mental.
You're completely mad.
Yeah.
Have a think about something else. And I said, no, look, I think it's going to work. I was quite fit at that stage anyway. So I thought, okay, from now on, so I think I set a 12-month target. So I thought in that 12 months, I'm not going to refuse a training session from anyone who offers it.
Yep.
So my rule was, if you offered me a training session, I had to do it.
Yeah.
So I had people coming in all the time. Matt, we're doing BJJ tonight. And you go, oh, all right, no worries at all. I've got to go do that. And then straight after it, we're going for a 5K run. Yep, no worries, I have to do that. And the next day, we're going to swim for 5 kilometres. Yep, no worries, I have to do that.
Yeah.
5,000K row, no worries at all. So I just constantly did these things over and over and over. So within the 12-month period, I felt strong enough. I was able to pace things enough as well. I sort of learned to pace rather than sprint.
Yeah.
But I knew it was going to be a pace. So then I opened up to all the students and said, anyone who wants to come in and fight, go get sponsorship from your friends and family, and then you can fight me for however many rounds that you want to fight me.
Yeah.
So we had kids coming in saying they wanted to fight me for 10 rounds, and adults would come in wanted to fight me for 20 rounds. So we sort of had to cut it down because the response was so great.
Yes. Yeah.
I ended up fighting 280 rounds that day.
Oh my gosh! Wow. So almost 3 times the pinnacle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Not that I would say that what I did was any greater than the 100-man kumite, because it was completely different.
Yeah.
I was resting at times throughout it as well. I think we did all the stats. I don't have the stats here, but I think amongst all the stats there was 180 adults and the rest were kids. And they also calculated how many punches were thrown, how many kicks were landed, how many, all these stats. And I looked at all these stats, and the 2,000 leg kicks that I took, and and the 4,000 punches, and it was just this ridiculous amount of stats. And I thought, wow, that's just incredible. But the last fight, so we started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the last fight was 7 o'clock that night.
Yeah.
And I'm a big one for nutrition. And like I always say to my students, is sugar is the enemy. And I see kids come into class with like their energy drinks, and I don't see the point of any of that stuff. You know what I mean? Even somebody at the pinnacle of their sport couldn't possibly use that amount of energy that is contained in these things. So at the end of the 12-hour fight, how things were going, because I had all my body composition done beforehand, I was on a very, very healthy, I think 12.5% body fat.
Okay. That's not bad.
It was a good amount.
Yeah.
And I needed that little bit of extra padding on me, because as you are getting hit so many times,
it protects your organs, doesn't it?
It does. It protects your organs. It protects your muscles from bruising, so you don't bruise as much. When I finished it, my body fat was higher than when I started.
Right.
I didn't eat it all that day.
Yeah. But
I did eat the day before. But what we saw at the end of it, this was the interesting part about it, was this is completely off the subject, I know, but towards the end, the last 4 hours, it was getting to the point where I was dying really, really fast.
Yeah.
And I could pick myself up, but then I'd die
crash
off.
again.
I'd crash, and I couldn't stop and eat. and didn't have the body process to be able to convert that food into sustainable energy.
Yep.
I used all the glycogen in my muscles, so the only thing that we could use was honey.
Sugar. Yeah.
So I'd have a teaspoon of honey between each round.
Yep.
And sure enough, I'd get up, and that was able to sustain me for that amount of time.
Yep.
But that was for like the last 3 hours. And the interesting part about that was you would think that it was only a small amount of sugar, but it was enough to sustain me. But even during that intense activity, my body couldn't process that sugar fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually it could, but I couldn't use it all.
Yep.
So my body was still storing fat.
Yep.
So I was still storing most of the sugar that I was intaking, even though I was physically at the very, very pinnacle of ability.
Your capacity, yeah.
So my capacity was super high.
Yep.
And those small amounts of sugar, my body couldn't even process it then.
Wow.
So it was still storing as fat.
Yeah.
So I ended up finishing it with more body fat than what I had when I started it.
Oh, that's crazy.
Which I thought was just amazing. And I think how much damage does it do when a child comes into a class with their sports drink, guzzle that down, think that they're actually doing something right for themselves, and all they're doing is putting fat in their organs. You know, because it's going to store as visceral fat around your organ. And I just so that sort of started my war with sugar.
You sound like my mum. Yeah. Where there was a war of sugar at our house, but sugar is allowed.
Sugar
now,
is allowed?
Well,
sugar?
in my house it is allowed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with me and Todd, yeah. He's a big fan of sugar.
Yeah.
But I guess like he's an endurance athlete. So
well, he's got every excuse in the world.
Exactly. So yeah, sugar and chips are training foods. Not actually, but yeah, sometimes that's what gets consumed.
It's funny how different people metabolize things differently.
Well,
but anyway, that's a whole other story.
That's the thing. Like every single person would react differently, and you've just got to do what works with your body. And I'm not a doctor, not an expert, but not one size fits all. Yeah.
It's funny, 2016 I dropped down to 4.5% body fat.
Wow.
And that was...
That's dangerous.
It was dangerous, it was. And then my teacher had a look at me this one day when I was in Thailand, and he said, you need to have sugar.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really, because my body doesn't metabolize sugar very, very well, and I get very, very hypo. So I had to drop off the carbs a little bit more as well, just because of the cardio training. So I thought, okay, up the carbs, up the sugar.
Yeah.
I'd have a scoop of ice cream every night. Within 2 weeks, I'd gone up to about 10%.
Wow.
And that was just through one scoop of ice cream, on top of my 7 hours of training every day.
Gosh.
And my 12-kilometre run, and my 20 minutes of skipping, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Just that one scoop of ice cream every day was enough to to nearly double the body fat that I had.
Wow.
In the space of two weeks. But I felt like garbage.
Yeah.
I felt really, really bad.
See, it's what your body can run on as well. Yeah.
So I found that protein and nutrients my body runs really, really well. Carbohydrates, not so much. Complex carbs, not real good at that either.
Yeah.
More simple carbs, simple sugars, like fruit sugars are perfect.
Yeah.
So fruit sugars, proteins, and nutrients, of course, from fruit and veg.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong.
Yeah, it's very interesting, like how different people metabolize different foods and how they react in their body. And I even know, like, between myself and my partner, we both eat kind of differently. And I know I go better with veggies and he goes better with more carbs. And it might be the way that we're training and our energy outputs. But yeah, it's definitely... that is very, very interesting. Now, back to the MS.
Back to the subject.
The MS fight. So you you actually gained body fat over it.
Yeah.
What, in those hours, I know you were feeling those dips. How did you feel? Like, were you really struggling mentally?
Mentally and physically, I'm able to sort of separate that very, very well.
Yeah.
I never knew that if I had to crawl over the finish line, I knew that that's what I'd do. If my last fight meant that I couldn't get off my knees, well then that's just the way it was going to be. So mentally I knew it was something I could do. I had to do it. I started it. There was no way I wasn't going to finish it.
Yeah.
I was a little bit worried about physically being able to complete it because I knew there was going to be a price to be paid for it.
Yes.
So I think I remember making a decision throughout the last 3 or 4 hours that I was only going to fight adults.
Yeah.
And I only wanted to fight experienced fighters because I was getting guys that were coming in that didn't have as much experience. They were throwing shots that would cause a lot more damage than somebody who's got a lot more skill.
Yeah.
They had a lot more control. So I had to be really, really mindful of that because I targeted a few big headshots as well. I'd lost most of the skin off my knuckles and my hands. I was getting blisters on my feet, all those things.
Yeah.
I expected all of that.
Yeah.
But, I was starting to worry too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we ended up changing the modalities a little bit as well. I ended up fighting jiu-jitsu for about an hour as well. And that was simply just so as I could lie down for a while.
Yeah, switch it up. Give your muscles a different bit of a... Yeah,
so I put the BJJ gi on and I fought some BJJ rounds as well. And that helped to change things up enough.
Yeah.
But getting through it physically, it was interesting.
Yeah.
But again, what I realised is by the time I got to the end of it, the next day I was at the beach, wading my legs in the cold water, and I was still walking. I was still functioning.
Yeah.
I came to the club that night, and I was still moving. So it wasn't like everything shut down. I had to go and rest. I wasn't carted off to hospital.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, well, did I really give everything that I could have given? Should I have given more? Could I have done better? Could I have fought harder? Could I have squeezed in another 20 rounds?
Could you have made it 13 hours?
Could I have made it 13 hours? Maybe I should have done it for 24 hours. You know, it's all these things I was sort of going through at that point, thinking I could have, if I wanted to, pushed harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
And I always had that thing where I was able to get through it and think to myself, I could have gone a bit harder if I wanted to.
You didn't leave it all on...
Didn't leave it
Is
all,
it the dojo? You didn't leave it all in the dojo?
Didn't leave it all in the dojo.
Yeah. But
then training with my teacher, when he took over my fight camps, there was never any training sessions where I walked out and thought that I could have possibly given any more.
Yeah.
It was extracted. It was
more than you thought you had?
It was certainly more than I thought that I had, but it was always going back into that last 20% of survival.
Yeah.
And literally I was having to survive at those times. And we went through some brutal training.
Yeah.
And I think there were a few things and at times where he sort of realised that maybe we went a little bit too far.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I'm dealing with those consequences now, but I still wouldn't change it.
From the lessons you've learnt from it. Yeah.
I think it gave me more mental, for the physical price that I paid, the mental endurance that I've gained from it far outweighs.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
My wife probably wouldn't agree with me, but yeah. And to be honest, now there is not a single thing that could possibly happen that would sway me any way to think that I couldn't get through it.
Yeah. Okay.
There's nothing that could possibly happen.
So 2020, the year of COVID-19, didn't even sway you a little bit.
Well, of course we all worried during that, but I knew that we were going to get through it. I knew we were going to survive it, and I knew that coming out of it, we were still going to be the biggest, the best, and the strongest club. Yeah. And we are.
Yeah. And you just did what you had to do to get through that time.
Just did what we had to do.
Yeah.
The hard part about that, of course, was that it was something that was completely out of my control.
Yes.
Because normally if I've got control of something, then the outcome's a surety. I know I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
But when it's in somebody else's hands, that's when you start to worry. And that was probably the first time in my life where it was completely out of my hands. But then I thought, well, okay, what can I do inside the constraints of what it is that we got, and push that to the nth degree, which is exactly what we did. So all the online classes that we were running, all the podcast stuff that we were doing, talking to the members on a more personal level through phone calls all the time. And I took on new ways of interacting with people that I still do today, which I think makes me a better businessman now than what I was pre-COVID. And I think a lot of big businesses did the same thing. It forced you in a position where you had to adapt to something else. And if you couldn't adapt and overcome, then you were going to be lost. You weren't going to come out the other end in an okay shape. And the idea of not surviving it was never an option for me. It was never an option.
Well, from being in here this morning, like, it's certainly thriving, and it's been nice to see the community still there and the busyness is still there, and it's been really awesome. Now, this is, speaking of the year that we've just had.
Yep.
This is why I've got my last question is, where do you see the future of sport?
Where do I see the future of sport? It's funny too, because everyone thinks that everything's changed because of COVID.
Yeah.
I personally don't think that that's going to be the case. I think that sport is still going to thrive. We need it as part of our, not just our physical well-being, but for our mental health.
Yeah.
It is so important. And without sport, you can't have as much passion in your life, and you need that passion in your life. And I think that's why we bounce back so well, because this is a sport you can be passionate about.
Yeah.
Everyone wants that in their life, and people prepared to break rules for that to happen. So I think the future of sport looks really, really bright. We just need to make sure that we've got the right coaches in place to be able to be good leaders.
Yeah, definitely. And like, speaking of the recovery, I know the swim school that I run, we have had record numbers in term 1, and it's been really great to see so many people passionate and wanting to get into it. And we had a wait list a mile long. We had, even speaking of like adults, so adults that have never learnt how to swim, I guess the drowning stats over summer maybe inspired that a little bit, but the adults that have never learnt how to swim, well, we've got a waiting list a mile long, and I'm trying to like scratch my brain and push things back and go, where can I put like these 10 adults that have a fear of water but want to get into the pool? And yeah, like it's amazing to see, I think, a positive future for sport. And I think COVID was a good wake up for the ones that maybe didn't know how much they needed sport in their life.
Yeah.
And it showed them how life felt when it's gone. You know, they might have taken their yoga class every week for granted, but it showed them what it was like without it. And yeah, I think sport has a good, positive future.
I think it does. And again, what we needed was just a little reminder, as we all do from time to time, that gratitude for everything in your life has to be at the forefront. And I think being shut down for so long, people really appreciated being able to come and train, and their gratitude for what it is that sports instructors and coaches do, the role that they play, and how important that it is on their mental health, on their kids' mental health, children's well-being. The importance of that couldn't be any higher now.
Yeah.
So to see parents who come in and actually deeply appreciate what it is that we do has been a really, really good thing. And now we've got all these really awesome problems like you've got. Where do we put these 10 adults? How am I going to accommodate this class of 50 kids?
Yeah.
You know, and they're just all good, positive problems to have.
They are, and at the time you're like, oh no, like not another one to put on the wait list. But then you're like, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Look where we were 6 months ago. This is the best possible problem with air quotations to have. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on.
No worries at all. Thank you. It's been really, really good. Great to be a part of your journey as well. I've been a friend of your families for many years now.
Yeah. And
just really excited to see where the future goes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Sport with Fiona Stewart. This is a completely independent podcast that has been created to share the journey and lessons of top-level sporting professionals, but also your everyday lover of sport. If you liked this podcast, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a review and share it with someone who you think would also enjoy it. Until next time.